everybody. Thanks for joining. It's good to see everybody again. Been a hot minute. By hot, I mean covered in sawdust most of the time, doing all the renovation stuff. But enough about me. How's everyone out there? Man, it's good to see everyone. It's good to be not laying on my back, cutting through ancient 2x12s with an oscillating blade and other fun things. Today is going to be just a 2-hour chat instead of the usual 3 because I have so many balls in the air, so to speak. So I'll try to get right ahead to some of the questions. Let's see. Hey, Josh Roberts. Let's see. There was a question. Here we go. John Ram had the first question. Dustin. For vintage AB763 amps, would it be wise to add a thermistor between AC hot and power transformer to limit inrush current and prolong the life of the power transformer and filter caps? Any downside? Thanks. Wisdom, you're going to get marginal theoretical benefits. It's not really a thing that's necessary. Most of these old, well-built amps, especially AB763s, have been going just fine for 60-plus years without thermistors. And thermistors are one of the most common things that can fail in an amp. So if I get an amp in, says, won't power on, and I open it up and I see a thermistor, a lot of times that thermistor is the cause of that. If you have an amp which has a rectifier tube, especially, it's not necessary, and that can really mess things up. So I don't think it's necessary. You can if you want. Probably won't hurt anything, but it's not the necessary thing. Let's see. I had a comment from Guitar Sanctuary. Hey, Brian, I will call you after this. Meant to call you a couple weeks ago. Let's see. Tips on desoldering turrets. Does a light application of flux help? It can. It can always help. You can add flux. You can just introduce a little bit of fresh solder, which will carry the flux over if you're using leaded solder. The biggest tip on desoldering turrets is to use the right amount of heat. So if I'm working with turrets, I want to have about 700 to 750 degrees Fahrenheit on my iron, and I use a chisel tip iron. Just one second. Was it mission a success?
What?
Were we successful? We'll talk. I'm sorry. Amazon return woes. We bought an Instant Pot, and it had one little piece of plastic that was broken. And because we'd already recycled the box, apparently she had to pay $20 to get a box to send it back in. So I'll be helping her with that. Anyway. Always something fun. So I use a chisel tip for most everything, and I will use the broad side of the tip, not the edge, so I'm getting a lot of heat transfer. And yeah, like Brad says, some turrets suck, and they're just dirty, and once they're dirty, it takes a lot of solvent or flux to make them clean again. So sometimes they just won't take solder at all, and I'll get in there with a little, what's the word I'm looking for? Hardened steel flathead screwdriver, and just kind of gently scrape off all the corrosion and then apply some flux, and then life goes on. But yeah, turrets can be challenging. A good turret is a wonderful thing. There are a lot of really bad turrets out there. Let's see. Yeah, it is the 7th of December, Mr. Mott, a date which shall live in infamy. And speaking of Mr. Mott, thanks for all the information on my unfortunate amp choices. So I changed out the tubes in my Princeton 68 reissue, and it's much quieter. Good. Still a gentle swish in the tremolo. Lost cause. Well, it depends on what you're describing. What you heard me playing before at the beginning of this was a 65 Princeton. That's the one in the thumbnail with the new fancy filter caps. More on that in a video coming up on that amp. But if you're hearing swish swish in a tremolo, sometimes the amp has a self noise that's not as apparent to you until you engage a tremolo, because then the entire volume is going up and down. So you hear the shh, 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 and you think there's something wrong with the tremolo. Really, the amp is always going shh when the tremolo is off. But on a Princeton, because the way it's a bias tremolo, if you have the bias set too hot, you can get noise when the tremolo is engaged. You can get artifacts in the sound. And the 68 reissue has got some design issues that I've covered in separate videos. But in general, a well-functioning Princeton, the tremolo is a glorious thing. I can't show you on this one yet because I'm waiting for 2 capacitors to arrive. Spoiler, had a 20, a 10, and a 10. The 20 measured 14. The first 10 measured 7, and the other one measured 8. So the minimum speed was very, very quick. So those are getting changed out to slow it back down to where it should be. And Brad's asking the hard-hitting question, how many roads must a man walk down before you call him a man? Well, from one perspective, it could be 17 average length roads, 32 really short roads, 1 really long road. But rather than mileage or kilometers, I go by calluses. In my case, I'm feeling especially manly these days. Thanks to Jameson. I'm pleased as punch with this casino. I have a friend who is a manager at a local guitar center, and he needed some amp work done. And they had this on the wall, and I got it at his price in return for the amp work. And, you can see the videos on this. This is the newest Chinese version, but they got the sunburst right. And a lot of other things have changed. And it's a really pleasant guitar to play. I changed out the hardware. I changed out the pickups to Fralins. I changed out all the wiring. I did some nut work, et cetera, et cetera. Still has the stock tuners. They're fine. And it's a little bit out of tune right now because of the change in the weather. But it is just really a pleasant guitar to play. And in fact, I quite happily go between this and the much, much more expensive 335. Similar feels, very different sounds with the P90s versus the humbuckers. I wish this thing had the fatter neck like the 335, but I've got about $700 into this, which would not even get you a down payment on the 335. So, much better. So yeah, I think this is really great. I just played the 3-chord out of 4 that make up Screaming Jets October Gray. An F? I played an F. An out of tune F, probably at the time that you typed that. Anyway, yeah, I'm really pleased with the casino, and I'm not a snob about amps or guitars. If it's a good one, it's a good one. There are great Squires out there. There are dog custom shops out there, and everything in between. You just got to play a bunch and find the ones that work for you. Let's see. Hey, Don Sambrook. He's got a 67 AB 765. AB 165. That's a Bassman. A volt of DC on the main board. Remove the boards for intense cleaning and drying. Got the DC to an acceptable level. 1 month later, 50% humidity. Back to go. Time for FG. I don't think that you need to change out for a fiberglass or epoxy board, especially in a 1967 Bassman. There are things you can do. It takes longer sometimes to get it all the way quiet and well behaved, because the moisture can be driven out, but you don't get all of it, and so it creeps back. you can really fight these things. You said you remove the boards for intense cleaning and drying. I mean, if you want to change out the board, you can, but you're going to devalue the amp as far as collectors go, and then it's a crazy game to play. I think if you're qualified to repopulate the entire thing and put a new board in and all that, just make your own version of it. Make a modern version of the Bassman, and sell the old one or keep the old one as it is. But yeah, it is difficult sometimes when those old suitcase liner fiber boards that Fender used, get a couple 6 decades on them, and all the humidity in the world goes. It was a fantastic circuit built as inexpensively as possible, and here we are now, all these years later. Let's see. Hey, Dead Amnesia. I have no thoughts on amplified Nation amps. I have heard rumblings in the industry that they're just this, or they're fantastic, or whatever. Or the guy's great, or the guy's not great. I stay out of all that. But I've not had one on the bench. I've not played one in real life. I've certainly not seen inside one. So I have no great insights to give you on that. I hope they're great. Fishman acoustic amps, on the other hand, I have had experience with, and they're really awful, really poorly built. I think if you want to do live acoustic amplification, you're much better looking at small PAs, basically, than a acoustic guitar amp. With all that stuff, you get what you pay for. There's a world of Bose, tiny little vertical speakers that promise you the world, and they're going to last about 6 months on a gig. You sadly get what you pay for. When you go see guys who really do acoustic live at a high level, whether that's like Lyle Lovett or Dan Tominski playing with Alison Krauss, and I can't remember the other guitar player with Alison Krauss, they don't have acoustic guitar amps on stage. They have really, really good sound guys and monitor guys who go on tour with them, and they have Clare Brothers and other systems, and they've got their EQs, and they've got everything, all the phase relations between the monitors and the guitars set up. But that's a very expensive thing to do. For most people, I think they'd be better off just carrying a Bags or Fishman box, which has a parametric and a DI and a phase reversal switch, and giving the sound guy the XLR out and having it in their monitors. If you're playing with monitors, it's Brad's saying that Fishman's service is great. That's fantastic, and they certainly can afford to, because the things are built so cheaply. But I don't think Fishman acoustic amps are really a viable thing. Hey, Billy Wagner. I haven't talked to you in a while. Hope you're doing well. Let's see. Tom's asks, added capacitance from shielding a guitar, significant or negligible if you had a guitar that sounds great but is noisy as? Would you worry shielding would change the sound? Improperly done shielding will put a big capacitor in a guitar, and you're going to have other issues. Properly done shielding, you won't have those issues, because you can separate the function of the shield from the function of signal ground. You've seen me shield a lot of guitars on this channel if you go through my guitar videos, and every guitar that I am able to shield, I shield. The 335 and the Casino are not shielded due to their design. They do have braided cable inside, though, so there's a partial shield there. But in general, shielding is fantastic, and I have not noticed any decrease in high-frequency response in any of the Strats and Les Pauls and Tellys and such that I've shielded. I have noticed a huge decrease in the amount of noise. I think proper shielding is almost a necessary thing on modern stages. I prefer to do paint. It's longer, it takes longer, and it's very thorough. Foil, you can have it come loose over time and touch things that should not touch. But if you have an old guitar which is potentially has collector's value, the foil is removable, and the paint really not so much. So I probably didn't really answer your question in terms of a hard and fast. But if you have a guitar that's shielded and it's losing high end to the point where you're like, oh, that sounds duller, something was done improperly. Mercury Magnetics Haddon versus Woden, which do I prefer in an AC30? Well, they sound very slightly different, as do the original Haddons and Wodens and Albions. And I've got one video up on the channel where I showed a Woden versus, I think, Haddon, both in a 63. 63 Woden, 63 Haddon. And I was changing them out in the same amplifier. That was the only variable. And they sounded slightly different. They had slightly different characteristics as to which notes fed back and such. From a text perspective, the Haddon's much easier to install than the Woden, because the Haddon doesn't bring the actual windings out on the secondary the way the Woden does. The Woden brings the actual internal windings out, and it's really hard to get the lacquer off and the enamel off and solder them. So I much prefer the standard wires coming out of the Haddon that Mercury does. As to which you'd like the sound of, I can't answer that for you. You would be happy with either. You'd be happiest with one of them, but I can't tell you, because that's a vanilla versus French vanilla, or a chocolate versus Dutch chocolate kind of thing. Purely subjective. Both are very high quality transformers, and both sound appropriate for an AC30. Hey, Joshua Stevens, I'm glad to hear that. He just finished his first amp built, a JCM 800 Cherrytone Seritone. Couldn't be happier. Wouldn't have been a success without the information learned from this channel and others. Great. Well, I'm glad to be part of the wider group of others. With the modern diodes at 1 kilovolt reading, why do I need to replace the 3 double row on bias boards? It's a good question, Ray. Because voltages spike. Voltages being rectified spike. And so you can have 600 volts AC, but you can get momentary spikes that are much higher than that. Now, Fender used 3 because they were using the older diodes, and so it was necessary. In theory, I could probably get away with just 1 N4007 per side of a twin, certainly 5407 per side of the twin. But 3 is even better. 3 gives the voltage drop of the old ones pretty much. 3 is a visually more appealing and gives a little bit of redundancy and keeps the voltage drop more or less the same as the old 3. That's arguable whether anyone could detect a 0.4 to 1.5 volt drop, depending on the diodes used. But I think if you're not doing a regular, full bridge, you can look at it as, well, what's necessary, and then what would be a little bit more than that. And given how inexpensive diodes are, overkill is fine for that. If they were $5 each, I'd be like, yeah, we're just going to use 1 per side, and I could use a 2K or 3K diode. But that's why. But you're absolutely right, Ray. Hey, Sebastian BC77. Yes, the 2 channels of a Super Reverb are jumperable. They are out of phase with each other, so you will not get additive gain the way you would with a Marshall, in terms of you turn them up and you get louder and louder, and they will cancel each other out. But if you set the tone stacks differently, you're not going to get total cancellation. You can get some really interesting sounds, especially since one of them you can have the tremolo on, so you can get some really cool sounds that way. But it is not a predictable. It is predictable, but if I were to give you the printout of all the possibilities, it'd be all this kind of crazy gobbledygook. It won't hurt a thing. Try it. See if you like it. You probably will like it. You probably won't want to use it as a core sound, but it'll be like, hey, I know how to get this other cool sound. Maybe for this second part on a recording, I'll do that. And then it'll be kind of this, be very shoegazy Portishead kind of thing. And that's cool, but that's not really a meat and potatoes sound. If you have like a tweed bassman and you jumper the channels, you get a very different response. Same for pretty much any non-reverb amp that Fender made. You can jumper the channels and get both. You get additive gain. Don't do it with an AB165 because then you'll have insane amounts of gain and insane amounts of noise, but you totally can with an AB165. Lenny's Brown Tooth, have I tried the Engineer SS03 solder sucker? I've got the SSO2. I love it. I use it all the time. I don't know if the SSO3 is even better or any different, or if they're just updating it. Yeah, these things are really nice, and I'm so glad I don't have to keep buying and throwing away those giant blue ones that have so much recoil, but the tips clog up if you look at them. Much less try to use them. Now, the Engineer Company, you can send the check to, I wish, but they're like $25. Hey, David S. He modified his YBA1 to super lead spec. Sounds great. Good. Power transformer has a slight buzz, though. Any comments on potting loose laminations worth the effort? Well, it's tough. Are you sure that it is absolutely a resonance thing? Because if you have a physical problem with the transformer, you might need to have it rewound or find something else that you can put in there. And that happens sometimes, but it's more rare, or it's less common, I should say, in an old amp, especially a Trainer. Those things usually had fantastic iron. It's very common in a 90s or 2000s Marshall or Vox made by Korg at that time, because the power transformers that they were making in the 90s and 2000s very commonly do that, and I've often have to change them out because that's the only solution. You can try loosening all the hardware and then retightening all the hardware to clamp all the laminations together to the bell covers and to the chassis. And sometimes, just one more quarter turn worth of elbow grease will make all that problem go away. Sometimes you can put stuff inside the bell. You just to physically dampen it. If you hear that it's ringing, if pushing your finger on it makes the issue go away, you can put spray foam insulation, silicone, all kinds of stuff in there underneath the bell cover. But it's tricky to give you any more information from here. I would say change the transformer or have the transformer worked on, rewound as a last resort. Try touching it in different places first, see if you can find a trouble spot. And hey, it's vibrating there. Either stiffen it or insulate it. I'm trying not to sneeze on you guys. Hey, Matt on the water. Well, Matt on the water, if you can hear this, if you're still here, this is your 65 Princeton on the bench behind me. Out of tune. The guitar has not been played in over a week, and I've not played guitar in over a week because I've been busy, and the weather's changing on the guitar's perspective. So there's always a good excuse, right? But the amp is really sounding nice. There'll be a video on it in a day or two once 2 more capacitors arrive. Then I'll get your 69 finished up. Yeah, Rain Song is crazy. I started to I was thinking I was going to do What's of the Deal. But I got distracted by the tuning and found myself doing an absolutely terrible rendition of the Rain Song. So we'll put that away. But yeah, Matt, that Princeton's coming along very well. And to everyone else who's waiting for their amps to get done, I apologize. I have been working while working on the bathroom project, but I have not had time to do videos. I learned the Rain Song a long time ago. That remembering the tuning is harder than playing the damn thing, but it is so fun to once you get it going. That one, and I love playing Sweet Judy Blue Eyes. That's all E's and B's for that one. This is just big fifth, droney, fun things. And I used to have, in that same tuning, I used to play Love You To by the Beatles. The original's in C, I believe, but I did it in E with that same tuning because it's so much fun to have all the drones going on. Let's see. Getting down to the next question. Remember, guys, if you can put a question mark or 3 in front of your questions, they stand out more. I'm not getting on to Greg. I mean, it's just easier for me to see them if they have question marks at the beginning. What do I think of what I personally think of the newer Bad Cat amps, the Jet Black or Black Cat? I have no personal experiences or impersonal experiences with them. I don't have a very high opinion of Bad Cat traditionally. I've always felt them to be promoting overkill in ways that give absolutely no benefit to the owner, and to, just like the mattresses, to be biased, crazy hot. But I understand that a new guy is running Bad Cat, and he's apparently a respected engineer. So I hope that he's fixed all that stuff. But I have no experience with him. I look forward to trying one. I hope that the new guy, whose name escapes me now, has just said, all right, well, this is a company with a great heritage. Now let's make that heritage match good quality. Because there's nothing stopping them except an insistence on being Mark Sampson's progeny. And Mark Sampson, there's some real strengths in his designs and some real weaknesses that he chose. They were easily avoidable. Don't use can clamps for glass tubes. If you're going to have 18 caps in an amplifier, don't have the leads wound around the terminals 18 times each. It just looks cool in a picture. It just gives absolutely no benefit to the user, and the user has to pay a ton of money when it's time to have any work done. Thanks, Detroit Wrecker. Thanks for popping in. David S. There's a new Mesa Mark II C Plus reissue. Oh, wow. Well, bless their hearts. Unknown Stone asks, is it better to attenuate high frequencies early in an amp circuit or later, or referring to frequencies north of 10K? Thanks. Well, you have to remember that the speakers are going to be one limiting factor, and the output transformer is going to be another limiting factor. So those are going to be colorations that you don't have much control over. The rest of it depends on the circuit, what you're trying to do. Sometimes it's good to have frequencies present in one gain stage that you're not going to want at the output, because you know that those frequencies are going to excite the next gain stage and bring out details. Because if I put in a 10K, say that your speaker only reproduces up to 5K. Let's just say everything above 5K is shaved off. That's not how it really works, but just say his 5K is shaved off. You have a frequency at 10K, well, it's not going to be present in that last thing, but when you have a frequency at 10K that is distorting, you get subharmonics of it. God, this is so hard to describe without charts and stuff. So sometimes it's good to have information feeding an input, even if it's not going to be at the output, because it's going to color everything after that. Other times, you're like, well, that's if I don't get rid of that now, I'm just going to have hiss in every other stage. So let's just put in a 100 picofarad right there from the grid to the cathode and shave off, or from the plate to cathode, and just shave off a whole bunch of stuff that we're not going to need down the road, because otherwise that hiss will be mixed in with everything. But in general, you'll want to do a little bit of both throughout the entire circuit. We could do an entire 3-hour stream on making these design choices, but I don't know that. I mean, I would have to really have diagrams and schematics and all the math done for you, and I don't have time to do that right now. But yeah, it might be fun to design an amp together, and not like, hey, let's build a champ together, but hey, let's start with, all right, how tubes work. And what do we want to do? Let's say we give ourselves a limit of 3 preamp tubes and 2 power tubes. What tubes do we choose? And let's say we're going to work with 300 volts DC for the preamp, just as a supply. Just simplify things. What choices can we make? Maybe we'll do that in the future. That'd be a fun thing to do. And that way everyone can argue with me in real time. Let's see. Hey, Dr. Paul. Is there easily repaired safety items put into a power transformer? I have an Origin 20 is only putting about 25 volts on highest volt leads. There are often fuses hidden in power transformers, but if you are, you would, for heat protection, etc. But you won't. Usually, it'll shut it off if there's a problem with that. 25 volts on the secondary, you probably got, you might have a bad thermistor, or what's it called? The one that goes across the variac, the one that goes across the hot and neutral. But you could also just have a bad power transformer. I'm afraid that the Origin 20s are really poorly built, Dr. Paul, and it would not surprise me if you have a bad power transformer. But it's also possible that there's a thermal fuse in it that could be dug out and changed out. But I don't know. I've not had one in with that problem, so I've not gone diving into that area. Hey, Ron Marcil, what is my opinion of a Jensen P10R speakers in a 68 Vibrolux Reverb reissue? I don't know that I've tried the P10Rs in that. For whatever reason, there aren't a lot of Vibrolux reissues floating around. I think I've had one in, and the guy had put in Alnica Golds, the 10-inch Golds. And I'm trying to remember. Some of the new Jensens sound really good, and some of them are really ice picky, and I don't remember which one it is on the P10R. I know I've played some Princeton reissues, which have one of the new Jensen 10 inches, which really sounded good. But I don't remember if it was the R or the Q or et cetera, et cetera. It's really hard for me to remember things like that. I don't remember sequences of letters and numbers very well. I can remember entire Shakespearean sonnets that are of no use to me in my day-to-day life, but I can barely remember my phone number. So when it gets to P10R or Q or N or all that, I misspeak. I call EL34s EL84s all the time, and 6L6s 6V6s all the time. And it's not because I'm stupid. It's just it's like I'm red-green colorblind. So it's just one of those things. I can't keep them straight. I know what they are, and I don't send out twin reverbs with 6V6s. But when discussing them, I might misspeak. Besides, if I didn't occasionally say things like that, no one out there would ever have the satisfaction of saying, ah, ha, 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 he said 6V6 when it's clearly a 6L6. Can I replace Silverface twin 80 microfarad bias caps with 100 microfarad? I can't find quality 80 microfarad. Absolutely you can, Jorge. You can also use 63 microfarad, and you can actually use 47. and a Silverface Fender, which has 270 or 270 or 280 microfarad caps in the bias, which is depending on the period and the supplier, they use 70 and they use 80. You can use 222s. You can use 210s. Really, it's if you look at it and squint, it's the same circuit that they had in the 58 Bassman, which only used 10 microfarads, and it works just fine. And it's what Marshall uses. And like I've shown on a lot of the additional caps I add to AB763, is because you're adding another node with resistance between the two nodes, you're decoupling it. And so the second one becomes much more effective, so neither cap has to be as large. So yeah, you can absolutely use 100 microfarad if you want. I would not use anything larger than 100 microfarad because, especially in a solid state amp like that, you want the bias voltage to be present and stable before the B plus starts to really be present, any signal flowing through the output tubes. And so you want to make sure that the time it takes to charge up the bias supply is less than the time it takes to charge up the B plus. So for that reason, 200 microfarad caps in the bias supply is about as large as you want to go, because you could run into issues down the road where, for whatever reason, the bias voltage wasn't there when the output tubes needed there to be a bias voltage. Yeah, but you could go down to 47 or 22 without any problems, let alone 100. Hey, the 65 Deluxe Reverb reissue is a really good amp that needs a little bit of help to make it really a long-term proposition, because Fender put the stuff that gets hot on the thing that doesn't like to get hot. But I don't remember if I like the P12Q or not, but you tell me if you like it. If you like it, I like it. Let's see. Can I talk about overfiltering? I can talk about anything. I don't know if I'll have anything valid to say or be entertaining or even correct at all, but I can talk about it. How do I approach increasing cap values to reduce ripple versus going too far up? What are the consequences to tone or response? Well, there's the objective and there's the subjective. Objectively, you've got to look at if you have a tube rectifier, there's going to be a max capacitance listed. So if you have a GZ34 or 5AR4 or 5U4 GB rectifier tube, I believe 60 microfarad is the limit. So the first stage really does not need to exceed 60, and might as well just cap it at 50. You can always add more to the screen node, which is separated by a choke or by a resistor, so it's decoupled and will not affect the capacitance seen by the rectifier tube. If you have a 5Y3, I believe the max is 30 or 40. I don't remember right now. I look it up every time. And so on a lot of Princetons that have 20, 20, 20, 20, sometimes I'll double up the screen node to be 40. So you get the benefit of reducing ripple without stressing out the rectifier. On a solid, look at Mesas. They have not learned that lesson, and their dual rectifier and triple rectifiers can have a really hard life with 110 microfarad on those poor rectifier tubes. Even though they're running the rectifier tubes all in together with each other, they still have that capacitance cap that Mesa exceeds, and they fail a lot. If you have a solid state rectifier, then it becomes safety really doesn't come into it, though, like I said, in the bias supply, that you have to make sure that the bias supply is stable before the output tubes get their voltage. So you don't want to have something too small. Of course, if you had something too small for the main filter cap, you'd also have a bunch of ripple. Once you have safety out of the way, it becomes subjective. What's the best way to put this? If you go too far and it begins to sound hi-fi, if it doesn't breathe, if it just doesn't feel good to play, you know you've gone too far. And you can also have really boring overdrive. It can sound very sterile and harsh. a lot of the overdrive sounds we like comes from a little bit of underfiltering. And it really affects the dynamics, and it affects which frequencies overdrive, and whether you're getting even or odd. And again, this gets really deep for this stream. And the other thing I guess I might mention is that if you have a choke, you need less capacitance in the screen node. Whereas if you have a resistor rather than a choke, you're going to need more capacitance overall. And if it's a solid state thing, solid state rectification, and then you're using a resistor instead of a choke, you're going to need more total capacitance for the reservoir and screen nodes than you will if you are using a choke instead of a resistor, because the choke reduces ripple because there's just no physical path. It's two fields that are getting excited, whereas the resistor may have the same decoupling. It's still not. It's still the same. I'm really not explaining this well. A resistor needs more capacitance to achieve the same amount of ripple reduction as a choke does by itself. I guess that's the best way to say it. So if you look at like the Vox AC15 Custom, it's got 47 microfarad for its first stage, and you could decrease that to 22 if you wanted to. It's not really necessary, but you'd have a little bit more like the JMI filtering. But the screen node in that amp is 100 microfarad, which you think, well, that's just going to be stiff as hell. And I've tried, when I first got that model in, seeing how it responded to lower values of capacitance. But because it uses a 1K 10-watt resistor instead of a choke, if you decrease that from 100 microfarad, all of a sudden you get ripple. So there are balances. And so you just got to say, what's going to give me the least amount of ripple while still giving the sound I like? Granted, old JMIs with 1616 for the first two stages have a lot of ripple, and you get a lot of ghosting, and some early J1845s were just like 32, 32, 16, 16. You get that, and there are trade-offs because there are guys who love that kind of on the edge of falling apart feel and sound, and there are guys who are like, I cannot deal with that hum. So I would say don't go over 47 on the first filtering stages for a J1845 or an AC30. There's certainly nothing wrong with living with a little bit of ripple because it not only gives the character when overdriven a certain level, it really informs and controls the clean sound as well. Because remember, what we perceive as clean is not really clean. So long before we hear the distortion, there is distortion happening within the circuit, and all these things work together. And if you change the puzzle, the entire structure changes. So all of a sudden, you have an AC30 that has no ripple in it. Well, the clean sounds boring. That's a really long way to talk around the subject, I guess. If I had known I was going to be asked that, I might have had a better answer prepared. But it's hard to freestyle some of this stuff. Hey, A-dubs, I have a chance to buy a pretty ratted out vintage Magnetone 460 with no tubes. Anything I should look out for? Look at the schematic, not as straightforward as an old Fender. Whoa. I would say, unless you already do this for a living like I do, that's not a project to take on. I would pass on that. They're just not that impressive. An amplifier, even if it had no problems, it's not that big a deal. And if it has problems, it's going to be a very expensive, not big a deal in terms of the sound goes. There's just so many really good tremolo pedals in the world today. I don't think most people should really spend hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars on rare tube tremolos. If you have the money, that's great. I don't wear Rolex watches. If you can get one, they start at $10K and go up. I think it's insane to pay that much for a watch when there are so many watches that tell you the time. For those who want one, that's fine. If they can afford it and it's not going to make them miss a mortgage or their kids are not going to go without shoes, go for it. So if you've got disposable income and just really want to preserve that particular weird bit of Magnetone history, go for it. But know that would probably be a money pit. And it's not something that I would want to do. let alone something that most owners should ever consider taking on. Because there's probably, and I don't mean to hold myself up as like the exemplar of techs. Brad here could do the same thing. We don't necessarily we don't really want to work on that magnetone. We're capable of working on it. We could do it. You wouldn't like our price. But in between the owner and a guy like me or a guy like Brad is probably someone who'd be glad to say, yes, I will do that for you, and I will do it for less money. But they won't, because they're going to make mistakes. It's a very complicated rat's nest, and they're going to either end up getting lost, and all of a sudden there's going to be tons of mistakes that you have to take to another tech to sort out, or it's going to take them so much longer to do it than what we do that you end up paying more. Even if you're paying less per hour, you're going to pay for more hours. It's, I would say, Danger Will Robinson. Hey, Buffalo Gruffalo. That's a cool name. Do I have an experience with a reissue? Fender 57 Bandmaster. Is this as flawed from a QA perspective as Fender's other current hand-wired amps? I have no experience with the reissue Bandmaster. The reissue Bassman, the 59 LTD, is a fantastic reissue with some weird things that Fender did, and I've got a fairly recent video on that. Over-filtered, certainly in stock form. But that was easily fixed. I don't have experience with the Bandmaster. I know that Eric Clapton Tremolux was an absolutely horrible thing. They made some really stupid mistakes in that. And the Edge 5E3, nothing against Edge, but really not a very well-built reissue. So I would have to look at a 57 Bandmaster reissue, and I've never had one in. So I hope that it's fantastic. It's possible that it's just the amp of your dreams, but they have a very iffy track record. In general, if it says custom shop or custom, I want people to run. On the flip side, the Bassman Limited LTD is really good. Not perfect, but really good. And the 65 reissues are really good. The hand-wired stuff and custom stuff is really not. Best device, amp cab sim for plugging guitar and pedals into an audio interface computer. Friedman 2 pedals, UA pedals, HX, Tonex, thanks. Well, T777, there is no best. I would say you can go the route of a dedicated hardware thing. And this is fine for a lot of things. And I've got the HX Stomp there on the ground. And I use them both, and I like them both for what they do. I think if I were telling someone starting out, since you're going to need it anyway, I use the Motu M2, which is a interface with two XLR or quarter-inch inputs, so I can do two guitars or two microphones. I could plug the guitar into that and run Logic or GarageBand, or there are various free and inexpensive DAWs, digital audio workstations, available for PC as well. And then you can get the plug-in version of this, because you can get the Tonex plug-in, you can get the neural amplifier plug-in, you can get the what's it called? The Helix plug-in. So if you're going to be focused on doing it in the computer, you don't necessarily need a dedicated guitar box, just something which can take guitar level in, like the Motu M2. But there's no one best thing. The Friedman 2 pedals I've not tried. I imagine that they sound very, very good, but that's not going to be... Let me put it this way, and I think Dave would approve of this. I think once you get into the Friedman things and you get into the UA things, where you're spending X money to get that sound, like this is the Friedman Marshall, this is the Friedman modded Marshall, this is the UA Marshall, the gold, what they call it, the Lion. This is the UA Deluxe Reverb. This is the UA Vox AC30. You're spending $400, $500 for a box which is dedicated to one sound. And if you can afford to play that game and you find that they give you the sound that you want, that's great. They're very high quality products, and UA and Dave both stand behind their stuff. But if you want to say, I want to spend $400 and have a pretty good Marshall and a pretty good Vox and a pretty good deluxe reverb, then this or the Motu audio interface and then running the software version of the Tonex stuff makes more sense for more people. That doesn't mean it's best. It means it makes more sense for more people. And if you're going to play the game, if you're going to play at the price point of like, hey, I use the UA for my Vox and I use a Friedman for my Marshall, you're on the slippery slope that leads you to the full fractal rig. Now, fractal is great, but it's much, much more expensive than the Tonex or the HX or Helix stuff. So it's all perspective and how much it works for you. But if you're asking that question, it tells me that you've not been playing this game very long. So I would say, if you're computer savvy, give them the interface and a digital audio workstation and a plug-in. If you're absolutely not, try the Tonex and try the HX Stomp, and headphones or into a pair of speakers. They don't need to be used with a computer. I mean, you need it to update stuff and all, but they do work as standalone. And in that case, I think the HX Stomp gives more bang for your buck. There's some things it doesn't do as well as the Tonex, but then Tonex doesn't do effects as well. So, it's always a push me, pull you. Hey, Did Amnesia. He's got a Mojotone vibroverb that makes a grounding sound like a touch lamp when touching the top-mounted external brackets. Purchase used. You've probably got a loose ground or more than one. If you're hearing a sound change when you touch the top external brackets, you're shielding the chassis. You are creating a shield at that point. And so noise, which would normally be picked up by the amp, is being blocked by you. I'm dumbing this down for brevity's sake. And that should not be the case. It could be the case that it's just that the chassis inside is not making full contact with a shielding on the inside of the cabinet, or that there is no shielding on the inside of the cabinet, so you're making it better when you touch that metal, which is touching the chassis. Or you could have a bad or disconnected grounds inside the amp. So I think that needs to be opened up, but I cannot tell you more than that. The Mojotone vibroverb, if built properly, will not exhibit that. But most people who build kits do not build them properly. Hey, Robert, what do I use to clean pots and what do I use as lubrication? I use Keg F5 Fader Lube. Does both in one shot, sprays a very, very small amount at once, and I can get it right where I want it. Brad's got some other stuff he uses. I don't know if it's just a matter of a better price in Australia. I know that the Keg Deoxit and Fader Lube is stuff that you cannot ship in certain ways. Like you can't overnight it, you got to do it by ground, but it works just fine. So Keg F5 Fader Lube. Make sure you get the one with the very small nozzle. Hey, Dr. Paul, I already answered your question about the Origin 20 power transformer. People talking about my tuning. Hey, Jorge. By embarrassing mistake, I connected the speaker output of a Silverface Twin to the input of the same amp, and the output transformer started to vibrate. Did I do any damage? Still works, though. Thanks. Well, if it still works and the vibration has gone away, you dodged a bullet. But when you were doing that, you were creating a huge feedback loop. So, I'm glad that it still works. But if the transformer is no longer vibrating, you're fine. Don't do it again, but because you dodged a bullet. But I doubt you. If it's working, you didn't do any damage, or the damage that was about to happen was stopped, because it would have been turned into a heat issue. And so if you turn it off before things got to the critical temperature, you're going to be fine. All right, Brad says they're starting to see very, very bad QC from the Chinese bad cats. Ground loops, non-tooth eyelets, safety grounds, no removal powder coating. Ooh, that's bad. I've not had any of the current bad cats, Chinese or otherwise, in, but that's good to know, and it doesn't surprise me. So they're building them like they build modern Supros. Then great. Bill Avonda, have I ever looked at a Fargan amplifier? I won't make any Johnny Dangerously jokes, but yeah, I am not a fan of Fargan, and it's because I had a Fargan amp come in. It was a Marshall 50-watt copy, and the owner was so proud of it because he bought it from Mr. Fargan, and Mr. Fargan's brother made the special custom cab for it. The cab was really poorly built too, but that's a separate issue. But this amp had very predictable problems because the board was made with balsa wood. It might have not have been balsa, but if it wasn't much stronger, somewhere between balsa wood and whatever they make popsicle sticks from. And wood is really not used very commonly as an insulator by anyone who does electronics with things that involve humidity and heat and high current, because wood is actually not an insulator. I see you there, Tom, once. So Fargan had this board with eyelets and a wooden board. It probably was poplar. It wasn't plywood. It was not plywood. It was solid wood. And when eyelets are soldered, they heat up. And so around every eyelet, there is toasting in the wood. The damn thing caught on fire for some strange reason. And I had to break the bad news to the owner that, yeah, I could fix it, but I have to defargan it, have to change out the entire board for something, designed to be an insulator. And Mr. Fargan was very unpleasant to talk to about this process, and he was Mr. Fargan, and I was just an ice hole. And I think reputations are very strange things, especially the reputations made in the days before. Right now information is so easily shared, but back when it was just Guitar Player or Vintage Guitar Magazine, you could really just kind of put anything out there, and if with enough copy, convince people that you were the second coming. But a wooden board, no, it's just ridiculous. Even Leo Fender, in his most stingy cost-saving moments, would never have considered a wooden board. And everyone's talking about Live at the Greek and Zeppelin and the Crows, and that is a great performance. If I want to use a variac with my vintage 64 Epiphone amp, should I have it rebiased? Thanks. Yeah, Luke, you should. Anytime you want to vary the mains, you're going to vary the B plus, and it may be that you have it rebiased and it went from one safe range to another safe range, but it's good to keep an eye on that. For instance, Dustin was just fucking stupid. On this Princeton here, I'll show it in the full video, but I changed the bias circuit. And it biased at 57% idle with my first setup, and I was like, "That's great." And then I realized that the wall voltage was at 109 because it's December in Memphis, and so I didn't touch anything. And out of curiosity, so it was at 57% idle with wall voltage 109. And then when the wall voltage came up later that day to 119, which is as close as I didn't wait for it to get magic 120. That same bias setting was like 69%. So both are in the safe range, but those amps those are very different parts of that range. So it's always good to control the bias, or at least know what's happening. You know that, hey, if I change the B plus by 10 volts, then the bias is going to change by 15%. Then you can say, well, what's the highest I'm likely to use this amp at? What's the lowest I'm likely to use this amp at? What would give me something that when it goes cold, it's not going to go below 47. When it goes hot, it's not going to go above 70. Because that's much more important to the long-term enjoyment of the amp than chasing a magical number that they told you had to have at the gear page. And the gear page is really not going to tell you even that. They're going to tell you a percentage. They're going to tell you 37 milliamps, man. You want 37. Which is a number that means nothing unless you know all the other numbers. And we're going to come back. Hey, Emmett Otter, we're going to come back to Vil Avanda's question on the Friedman and the Marshall in just a moment. We're going to take one intermission, and then we will have the second hour. And today it's probably just going to be the second hour because I've got to help Nikki do some stuff. So see you guys in 7 minutes. I'm back. Nikki says I can go the third hour today after all, so we'll do the regular long one. So you guys are stuck with me a bit longer. And let me do this. This is that 65 Princeton reissue on 2. If I turn off the tuner pedal. And what else do you really need, guys? Really? Now, I started playing that. I fumbled it because I slid up to the 4 chord and my guitar slid, and so I was a step low because I'm a pro. Anyway, I was watching there's a new documentary. I don't know if it's new. I saw it yesterday for the first time on HBO on Max about Stax, which is the recording studio / record label that is near and dear to my heart and near and dear to my house. I'm about 7 minutes from Stax, and it's just been such a joy to listen to. So if you have Max, I strongly recommend you finding the Stax documentary. It's very, very good, and the music, oh my God. And they played it a lot better than I did for some strange reason. In my defense, I've not played guitar in about a week, but I've been manning the Sawzall. Let's see. So, Bill Avanda wants my opinion on the Friedman Little Sister and the Marshall Studio JTM. I have not tried the Little Sister. I've had on the bench and played several Friedman amps, but not the Little Sister. I know what it's going to be. The common factor is they're all going to be built and designed to the same standard. So I can recommend, without any reservations, any model that Friedman makes. The only qualification I would tell you is, when Yacht Rock's coming up, Rob, we're going to watch Yacht Rock afterwards. The only qualification I give you is that Friedman has a lot of different amps, which are all variations on Marshalls. So you may like the Dirty Sister, you may like the Pink Taco, you may like the Runt, and they're all going to be variations on what or the JJ thing, So I can't tell you which one is the right one for you, but they're all really well built, and they're all built. He has some at different price points depending on whether it's PCB or hand wired, but the quality is going to be the same, and the tone detail is going to be this consistent. So I highly recommend them. I have not tried the Little Sister yet, though. The Studio JTM is a piece of shit. Don't buy it. Sorry to be so succinct, but, Let's see. Any suggestions for improving the musicality of a THT univalve head? Well, Andy Marshall made really good amps, and he's really knowledgeable. I used to have a univalve, and it is a really good sounding amp, but it is, I wouldn't say that it lacks musicality. It is not a very flexible amp, which is ironic given the premise that you change the output tube and magically change all these things. I owned it when I was a baby electronics guy. So I was very taken by the design, and now I realize it was just a cathode-biased amp, which means that, like any cathode-biased amp, it can work with a number of output tubes, but it's going to be optimal with one type. So without having a univalve on my bench or looking at the schematic again, I cannot tell you whether it'd be best with a 6L6 or best with a 6V6 or best with a 34. I was running an EL 84 with Yellow Jacket last time before I had to sell it. Don't get divorced, kids. Anyway, it's a good sounding amp, And there's a reason that he started doing the bigger versions for more gain, because the univalve doesn't have a ton of gain by itself. But there's a world of pedals out there. For a while, my rig was that univalve. I don't remember what cab I had, and I had a blue, what was it called? The full tone, full drive 2. It's probably worth more than these guitars these days, the way the crazy market goes. But I think the univalve, if you're fine with 5 watts, was a really good sounding amp. Less watts with a 84, but always just play around with it. If it doesn't work for you, there's nothing to change about it. But if it works, it works. Really long way of saying it's a really good amp. If it's not the right amp for you, move it on to someone that it will be the good match for, and find something else for yourself. I have not had a Gabriel or a Splan on my table. Sorry, Gary Bertolo. Music writing and life. What do I think of the Harmony H620? I'm trying to remember which model that is. There was one little Harmony I've had in, and it might have been that model. It was like a 6 or 8 inch speaker, and the amp just sounded fantastic. Had almost no clean headroom, and the overdrive character was just phenomenal. I'm sure it was totally an accident, not what they were hoping to achieve for the price point. But I don't remember if it was H620, like I just did H260. I don't remember strings of letters and numbers well, so it has to be really hammered in, where like AB763, AB165, stuff like that. So if it's the model I'm thinking of, it was a great amp. But I'm talking about the original one from the late 50s and early 60s. I don't know if there's a new one called the Harmony H620 or not. Anyways, to make a Blues Junior more reliable, well, yeah, to a degree, but it's not worth doing. If you have one and you really, really needed to have that amp, then Brad Guitar Garage builds a replacement board for the output tubes, which fixes that issue or delays the onset of major problems in that are predictable in that model. But it's really not a very good design, and it's insultingly poorly built. And needs $300 worth of work to be kept going. And at the end of the day, it still sounds real boxy because the cab's too small. It's frustrating. It's one of the most popular amps ever made, and looks kind of vintagey, and people hear with their eyes. So people love those things, and they buy them like hotcakes. And when it burns up, they buy another one. And when that one burns up, they build another one. And when that one burns down, falls over, then sinks into the swamp, they buy another one. It's a weird thing to watch. Hey, Lucas Belinsky, you're very welcome. What's the better quality build back in the day, Fender or Marshall? And what's the quality between the two now? Thanks. Well, back in the day, until about 1973, Fender was always better built than Marshall. And then Marshall was better built certainly until 83. Probably, I would say that while Marshall went downhill a little bit in 83, they didn't really start to go downhill in a major way until 1990. And Fender had a bad period during the 80s. And it's not because Paul Rivera was doing some designs for them. The execution was not great. From the production side of things, I think that's why Paul left his association with Fender. I don't think they were building the amps he designed the way he intended them to be built. During the 90s, I'd say they're pretty much equivalent. And during the 2000s, Fender kept about the same level, which is not a very high level compared to how they were before 1980. But since 2000, Fender has mostly kept at the same, not very great level, at least for the reissues. The Blues Junior, the Pro Junior are built terribly. Hot Rod and Blues DeVille's and all that, built slightly better, but not really great. But the 65 reissues, which started, 94, 95, I think? Those are pretty good. They're not great. They're not as built as well as Fender used to, but they've been consistently pretty good for the last 20, 30 years. And Marshall has just gone off the cliff. Marshall is making more money off their Bluetooth speakers and their refrigerators now than they are off actual amps for musicians. So, and if someone takes just what I said here and says, "Hey, I got a 72 Marshall, it's better than any 72 Fender," or "I got a 68 Marshall, it's better than any 68 Fender." I'm glad you think so. But Marshalls were never particularly well built until 73, when they started doing the PCBs. They were just very inconsistent before then. There's nothing wrong with that. They weren't inconsistent and terrible, but they were inconsistent. Some would be really great, and some would be not so great. You could have a 68 Marshall one serial number away from Eddie's, built on the same plant line on the same day, and his sounded like Eddie's, and yours would never sound like that because they grabbed the wrong resistor, or they left 4 inches of extra bit of wire in there. They just weren't very consistent in the 60s. Doesn't mean they weren't great, but they were inconsistent. That's one of the things that PCBs can give you, is a much higher degree of consistency. Let's see here. Hey, Reed. You picked up a Pro Junior for cheap after a few hours of playing and having volume problems. With volume turned all the way down, I have volume, turn it up, and it goes nuts. Thanks. Well, I'm afraid that the Pro Junior is really poorly built. It sounds like you might have a grounding issue, because when you turn the volume down, it's not grounding out, and then when you turn it up, it goes nuts. Could probably be a broken volume pot, or could be a broken solder joint, both of which are very common. They use plastic pots in the Pro Junior, really flimsy little plastic pots, and the solder joints are just kind of suggestions. The trouble with the Pro Junior is it's not really worth putting a lot of money into fixing. But if you know how to solder and you're methodical, you can open the thing up and take care of things like that pretty easily, and you can still get the pots for it. It's just if a client brings me one, I have to say, well, look, this thing's worth $200 used, and I charge $80 an hour. It's a 2-hour job, so go buy something else. Be better. They're almost disposable, and I don't like the landfill mentality. I don't like the fact that a lot of these amps go in landfills. I really dislike the idea that we have a finite supply of vacuum tubes, valves available to us, and so many thousands of them a year or millions of them a year are being wasted in these Chinese import things and things like the Chinese bag cats and Pro Juniors, especially the amps that just nuke EL84s by design. We're not going to have tubes in 20 years. And so whatever we have, I think we should be more careful with. And all these landfill amps just kill tubes that could have been used to make something good. And it sounds snobbish, but it's not. I'm looking at it from the perspective of someone who loves music and loves the sound of these things, and who also wants to protect his clients' wallets. But it is fixable. I have no experience with an Laney AOR Pro Tube 100. Sorry, Andre, but thank you for joining us. Hey, Lucas Belinsky. I'm not a trainer expert. I love the Bassmasters, the YBM ones. There was another one that I don't care for that I've been told was great in the late 60s, early 70s, and then went bad in the late 70s. I guess I had late 70s experience with it. I guess the ones I had in with bad experience for late 70s, and that was YGM something. And then I had a twin, the Trainer twin reverb equivalent model. It's not based on a twin, but it functionally equivalent. I thought that was a great, though very heavy amp. I would contact Canadian techs and ask them their opinions, because they're going to have more experience of more models than I do. In Memphis, we don't get a lot of trainers, but every Bassmaster I've had come in has been a phenomenal amp, or had the capability of being a phenomenal amp once I recapped it and changed out a few things. You got to get rid of the stupid 5-amp circuit breaker because they're faulty. You got to change some of the grounding, things like that. But and also there's linear taper pots that go from nothing to kill. So changing the volume pots to audio taper is really nice. But that's relatively inexpensive stuff. Thank you, Goody Guitars. It's very kind of you. How much does playing matter? How good a Vox 15R sound? The better the player, the better it sounds. Well, yeah, in general, the better the player, the better it sounds. At the same time, I've gotten some criticism over the years over my Marshall Origin 20 or Origin 50 review, where I like, well, it doesn't Marshall or whatever I called it. And I had my Les Paul, and I was in the other room, and I just played an A chord, and the amp just wasn't doing the Marshall thing for me. So I wasn't really playing. I was like, if I plug a Les Paul into a Marshall and I hit an A power chord, I know instantly. And so that's pretty much all I showed in that video, that, hey, no, this thing is just not doing it. It does it. And then if you look at the design, it never was going to do the thing. And then I get more flack for the AC 10 custom video, where I'm showing that, hey, it sounds really good when it's clean. It's a bit bright because it doesn't have a real cut circuit. It has a built-in cut circuit set to stun. But as soon as you push it, it breaks up, and people are like, oh, you're not even playing it right. I'm like, I wasn't trying to play. I was trying to show you dynamics. So, just this thing again and again. People don't understand that I'm not here to entertain you or to show off how well or how horribly I play. Some days I play pretty well. Some days I'm not feeling it. I certainly don't feel it when the amp's not playing along with me. But, a really great player is going to sound better on a bad amp than I will. A really great player is going to sound amazing on a really great amp. And so when I bring the good players over, typically it's to play through the really great amps. But yeah, if you give me, bring a good player over, and I'll take any crappy sounding amp, as long as it passes signal, it doesn't go in the background. I can make a recording, and I can, especially on YouTube, I can do the camera and the lighting and everything, and then add a little reverb and delay and stuff, and some magic fairy dust in the processing. You're going to think that's the world's best sounding amp, but you get it home, and it's not going to sound like that in your apartment. So there's a lot of smoke and mirrors in the way gear is presented on gear YouTube, and I try not to be a part of that. And I try to present, this is what this amp actually sounds like, and including the fact that if I plug a Les Paul into a Marshall and I hit an A power chord and it doesn't do what a Marshall does with a Les Paul A power chord, that's all I need to know. Hey, V-Dub guy. He's got a 65 Deluxe Reverb reissue and wanted better control of reverb. Heard that I could switch reverb tube, that is 12AT7 for 12AU7, for better reverb control. Is that true? Is there a better option? Well, an AU has less gain than an AT7, so you're going to have a little bit less reverb feeding the tank. The real issue is that the return, the reverb pot, is a linear taper versus audio. If you were to change out, theoretically, if you were to change out the linear taper 100K reverb pot for an audio taper, you'd have better control over your reverb, but then you're changing a pot. You could also you can try the AU7 and see if you like it, but you can have a different signal noise ratio. An AU7 will be fine in that spot. It will give you a little less reverb. I'm not a big fan of it because it's already it doesn't hold up as well long term as an AT7 does. It's a very cruel circuit to an AT7, and it's even harder on an AU, but it won't hurt anything. You can try it. You may have to change out the tubes every 2 or 3 years. Reverb tanks vary a lot though, so before you chase your tail with tubes or pots, make sure that the tank is the right tank, because a lot of modern tanks have a much longer delay time than a real one. And see, my usual test tank is an MOD. No, it's not. No, it's a Mojo tone, and this is a Mojo tone that's hooked up to this one now. And these are both medium decay tanks. Let me let you hear this. Let's see. Let me turn on the gate so when I do the guitar, it won't clip this mic. So. So that is the Mojo Tone medium decay tank, which has a decay characteristic both in terms of length and tonality, much more like the old Belton Accutronics or Gibbs long decay tanks. So the old tanks in the 60s were long decay, and the decay was more like a current Mojo Tone medium decay. If you get the MOD, TAD, or Mojo Tone long decays, they're really long and they're really dark, and then you're always fighting your reverb level because it's like, well, it's just way too much. As soon as you hear it, it's too much, and it's dark. Whereas the medium decay, and the MOD and TAD make one, and so does Ruby, but I think the Mojo Tone one is the closest I found to the old ones. That has a closer tonality to the old ones, and that's the right decay, or it's in the right range. It's not as good as some old Gibson Accutronics are like, oh, that's the thing, bronze that, put that on your mantle. So there are a lot of things that go into it. It can also vary on the 12AX7 used for the recovery tube for V4. Sometimes you might want to find one with a weaker return, and you can, if you go to the Tube Store or Tube Depot and tell them, they can sort out one and say, all right, section A is going to be 80%, section B is going to be 110%. Then you're going to have a strong mixer stage, the V4B, but your reverb return will be a little bit weak. You can get down to that level if it's really that critical to you. Hey, William Napolitano. I think the Fender 60-watt Pro Sonic amp head. What do I think of? Okay, I don't know if I've had that model in. The last Pro Sonic I've had in had a very noisy reverb. I had to fix that. That was a problem. That was like a 94. I don't know if there's a new one. I don't remember a Pro Sonic with a 3-position rectifier setting on the back. So I'm not sure that I'm familiar with the model you're referring to. Sorry. Hey, Moribund JT, which is it's like a regular JT, but moribund. All right, which I'm sorry, JT. I got a 78 Silverface twin with master volume. Is there any must-do reliability tone mods to do other than caps? Well, change out the filter caps and make sure you don't have conductive wax. You've seen that on my channel a lot on every 70s Fender that comes in. On the master volume on that, if it's push-pull, don't pull. Just leave it in. And if that master volume has got a bright cap on it, take off that bright cap because that is not your friend. Other than that, it's a good amp with the following issue. Fender decreased the grid leaks on the phase inverter from 1 meg to 330K, which means that they should have increased the value of the input cap by a factor of 3, since they decreased the grid leaks by a factor of 3. But instead, they increased the input cap by a factor of 10. So on the AB763, there's a 1 nanofarad input cap and a 1 meg grid leak. On yours, there's a 330K grid leak, but there's a 10 nanofarad input cap. And so that amp has way too much low end coming into its phase inverter, and then it can get really woofy. And so to make a Silverface feel much more and sound much more like a 60s, which is a much tighter low end and much more pleasant to play from more situations, if you change that 10 nanofarad input cap to a 3.3 nanofarad or 3300 picofarad cap, all of a sudden you'll have the same frequency response as the 60s amps while changing one inexpensive part. And I highly recommend that. The other issue is sometimes they used linear taper bass pots in the late 70s versus audio taper on the 250K. And if they use the linear, then it's going to have it's going to go from nothing to flub. So you want to make sure that the bass the bass pots are 250K audio taper. 10% is fine, and make sure that the input cap to the phase inverter is changed from the 10 nanofarad to a 3.3 nanofarad, and just take out the bright cap in the master volume. Make sure all the filter caps are good. Make sure you don't have any conductive wax, and all the pots are clean. You're going to have a fantastic sounding amp. Let's see. I have no thoughts on the Mesa Cali Tweed. The little sister, I'm sure, is great, but I don't like any Mesas. Speaking of which, is the Mark II Plus C Plus reissue just a shameless cash grab by Gibson? I don't know, but it wouldn't surprise me. For years, Mesa wouldn't do it because the vintage transformers couldn't be reproduced, and they were a big part of the tone. Thanks. Well, that's a bunch of nonsense. There were no vintage transformers. It's. I don't know why Mesa says the things that they say. They never use any unobtainium vintage transformers, and a company of Mesa's scale could have any transformers made for them that they wanted to. I think they wanted people not to want the 2C Plus, because if they say that the 2C Plus was so great they have to reissue it, there's something wrong with the Mark III. There's something wrong with the Mark IV. There's something wrong with the Mark V, and they really want you to keep buying the newest and greatest. I think Mesa, as a company, has never been able to admit when they make mistakes. So why would they lionize the 2C Plus? Gibson, however, has been living on its past reputation for a long, long time. So if they have a new asset in the corporate ladder and they can reissue something else, they're going to reissue it. And whether they do a good job or not, we'll find out. If it's possible to make a worse sounding amp than a Mesa, then Gibson will find a way. But the bar was low to start with there. At least maybe they'll get the neck angle right on this one. Hey, Michael Smith. Sorry I'm late. Was installing a pick guard upgrade on my telly and only had to plug and re-drill 5 of 8 screw holes due to misalignment. Well, that's not too bad. You usually have to do 7 or 8. Hey, Jason Hobbs. Just got an early 67 Blackface Super Reverb amp in mint shape with all original 66 parts. Filter caps are replaced, but I need the screen and grid resistors replaced. Hopefully you've changed out the cathode bypass caps and the electrolytic in the bias supply. Other than that, if the screen and grid resistors on the output tubes measure okay, you're probably okay. I will often change out the screen grids preemptively on a client's amp because I know that once I recap everything else, that the amp's going to have its full voltage available for the first time in many decades. And so the 30-year-old screen grid resistors may fail at some point. And if they have me do all this work on the amp, and I don't want them to come back 6 weeks or 6 months later saying, hey, this resistor burned, so I'll go ahead and change them because they're inexpensive. And they are prone to failure. But if you're doing the work yourself and you measure that they're all, all about 490 ohms or whatever, and they're all seemingly aging the same amount, and none of them are out of spec, none of them look scorched or anything, and you want to keep them in, keep them in. You'll know pretty quickly if one goes south. You saw, or maybe you didn't, but 2 weeks ago, in the last amp videos I released, I was measuring the screen grids on a Fender Deluxe Reverb, and like 1.6K, 1.8K, 1.7K, and 3.8K. So that 3.8K grid stopper needed to be changed. You can do it preemptively because it's just a resistor. But if I'm doing it for someone who has to ship the amp to me, it's different than if you're doing it on your own amp, and you can always leave it there until you have a problem. Is there a JTM DIY clone kit I would recommend for price quality? I've not kept up. I don't keep up with kits. I'm sure Mojotone's kit is really good. The Stereotone kit is pretty damn good. I'm not sold on their transformers. I would go the Mojotone kit over that, but I've not built one because I don't build kits and I don't keep up with that. Sorry. Thank you, Rob. That's very much appreciated. It will certainly help. Everything is going to Lowe's and Home Depot and lumber yards these days. But I'm almost at a turning point, and I'll be glad to show that once I get about another 3 days worth of tough labor under my belt. It's very kind of you, Rob. I really do appreciate that. Let's see. Now people are replying to my comments on Fargan. So I'm always behind on these things. So if anyone's asked a question, I will be getting to your question as soon as I can. But I'm easily 40 minutes behind or more. Hey, Jason. Happy Saturday. Thanks for the videos. Well, thank you for watching, Jason. He heard me mention somewhere that the standby on some amps is unnecessary and sometimes may be harmful. That's true. What about the AC15C1? Thanks a bunch. On the AC15C1 and the AC15CC1, the custom classic, I recommend do use the standby because the filter caps in the preamp section are rated for like 350, I believe, on the custom classic and 400 on the custom. And so at the moment you power the amp on, if it's not in standby, the preamp filter caps will have a voltage approaching or exceeding their rating because it is solid state rectification in both those amps. Now there's no current present, or there's barely any current, so it's arguable that part is fine. The other issue, and this only applies to the custom, not the custom classic. The custom classic uses a plate-driven tone stack. The custom uses a proper cathode-driven tone stack with a cathode follower. But a cathode follower really, you should use the standby switch on any amp which has a cathode follower if it does not have a tube rectifier. So if it has a cathode follower and it's solid state, so that's going to be the AC15C1, the AC30C1. Those are the custom series. That's going to be pretty much every Marshall made after the JTM 50. It's not going to be a traditional AC30 with a tube rectifier. It's not going to be a basement, tweed basement. It's not going to be a JTM 45. The cathode follower, until that preamp tube is warmed up, and it's actually flowing, drawing current properly, you can have a problem with too much voltage because there's going to be like 300 to 400 volts on the grid and nothing on the cathode yet. You can have an internal fault on that tube, and that can kill a tube, especially a Russian tube. So once the tube is drawing current, then all of a sudden it's going to have maybe 2 to 250 volts on its grid, but it's going to have a fully energized cathode. And that's where I would really need to have the data sheet in front of me to tell you the proper terms beyond that. It's a bad idea. And there are ways around that with diodes and limiting resistors and stuff. And if you want to modify your amp to prevent that from being an issue, you can find out how to on valvewizard.co.uk. Merlin discusses that, though it's a little bit difficult to do to some existing amplifiers. But yeah, in the short answer, between that and the lower voltage rated filter caps, go ahead and use standby on yours. Won't hurt a thing to use it, and can make the V-tube last longer if you do. I have no opinion on Bogan amps. Sorry, Jen. Wish I did. Eventually, I'll know more amps, but Bogans are relatively rare. They're amps that I know of but have not experienced. Hey, Greg's Place. How hard is it to add an effects loop to a tube amp? A Fender 65 Princeton reissue, for example. Hope this has not been asked yet. I just got here. It has not been asked yet. It's not difficult for a good tech to add if there's real estate. 65 Princeton, you just have real estate to do that. There are a lot of really good boards from available from various manufacturers. Friedman's got a good one. Jason at Head First has got a good one. The Metro board is great, and they're not terribly expensive. And they use really good modern MOSFETs, and they tie into the existing B plus and all that fun stuff. And if there's room for them physically, you can add them. I would argue, however, that it's certainly not necessary on a 65 Princeton reissue. There's no circumstance I can ever imagine where I would need an effects loop on this Princeton behind me. Just put the pedals in front, or add the effects to what the microphone picks up in post. I have heard Bill Frisell play doing looping and all kinds of crazy atmospheric stuff going, just beautiful. It's like this very organic synthetic thing happening where he's just in control of all these spinning elements, and he's got delays on his reverbs and his reverbs on his delays, and this loop is feeding into this loop. And his rig was 2 deluxe reverb reissues from rental, because he had everything running in the front of those amps, and he sounded fantastic. It just, when you play a clean Fender, you can put all kinds of stuff in front of it and not have any issues. The issue is if you have a Marshall or something very high gain, you may want to have your delays and reverbs after that. And it gets tricky depending on the amp in question whether an effects loop is the best solution for that. A lot of times these days it's better to do that in post, or you can look at the solution that what's it called? Just had one in not long ago, the Friedman power station, where you can take the level from your amp and send it through effects, and send the effects to a separate wet return. There are a lot of good options these days, but I'm not a big fan of adding effects loops to Princetons. Hey, Jim PRW, is there a replacement speaker for a Blues Junior 4 that, based on specs and or construction methods, is best suited or would be more compatible, therefore, than the Celestion A-type? Well, first of all, there's no difference between the Blues Junior 1, 2, 3, or 4. The difference is, the version 1 had one capacitor rolling off some high ends that the later ones didn't have. And then they would change from chrome to a black powder coat on the chassis. But the circuit's been the same pretty much. So they've got a new one now that's cathode bias, but they're still calling it the 4, so I'm not sure how you know if you're getting the fixed or the cathode bias if it's a version 4. But it's always been the same. The good news is they're finally shipping with some pretty good sounding speakers. The Celestion A-type sounds pretty damn good in that amp. The previous Eminence and Jensen custom designed for Fender generics were terrible sounding, really harsh, boxy speakers. The A-type sounds quite good in that amp. There's a limit to how good any Blues Junior will sound because the cabinet dimensions are very mid-rangey and boxy. The same way that a deluxe reverb does not sound as good as the same amplifier run into my shop cab. The same reason that the low end out of this Princeton with its speaker is not as good as the Princeton run into my shop cab here. The cab just limits what the speaker can do. So you can throw all kinds of money at a speaker in a Blues Junior, but the cab is still going to be limiting it. It is an open back cab with a lot of chassis in front of it and the very small dimensions. So I would say that if you're playing the Blues Junior through the Selection A type and you're not happy with the sound, either you're not happy with the Blues Junior, which is very possible, in my experience, certainly the case, or you may want to play around with an external cab, because that Blues Junior into a larger cab will sound a lot better. I mean, I'm not doing this to show off or to play. I'm not a playing channel. I'm not Leon Todd or something, but this is a Princeton Reverb. Volume's just over 2. Treble's at 7.5 because it doesn't have a bright cap. Bass is at 5.5, and the reverb's just over 2. And here's the neck on a Strat. Turn the reverb up a little bit. That's a really nice reverb. That's a really nice low end, but that's not the stock speaker. Granted, it's a 65, not a reissue, but the reissue sounds a lot like that. That's through my shop cab, which is a large open back 2x12, and I've got a Royer R10 about 6 inches in front of the ET65. So that's like low end city. Depending on what you're listening to me on, you may or may not have heard that. You can't get that from the stock 65 Princeton, no matter what 10-inch speaker you put in there. The same way you can't magically make a Blues Junior sound too different than it is. I think that the A-type is a really good choice. Hey, Gooden. Thanks, Sam. I'm happy to be back. Let's see here. Pastor Ben Tonnet is about to build his first amp, a 5E3 kit from Earl Tone in Finland. I won't even try to say what you're saying. Haivia Palda? So I'm probably mispronouncing your last name, Pastor Ben Tonnet, and I apologize. But let us know how it goes. I hope it goes great. All right, Brad, I see you there. Let's see. Hey, Bruce, man. My favorite speaker in a Princeton Reverb is sorry, I'm reading two things at once. I like the Warehouse G10C an awful lot. I also like the ET10, but I prefer the G10C. It is a 10-inch version of the Jensen C12N, basically. C12N was my favorite 12-inch speaker that Fender ever used. They never used it in the Lux Reverb. They only used it in the Twins and the Pros. And the 10-inch version of that Warehouse makes just makes a Princeton sound as big as possible. Granted, what I just said, the cab limitations mean that it cannot be tremendously huge low end, but it's very, very nice. And it all says, well, hey there, Frank. Thanks for joining us, man. So that'd be my preference. And there are some other good ones, but I like a Princeton to have a 10-inch speaker because that is something that records particularly well, because a lot of the low end that we get off on in the room doesn't always translate well into a record. And if you listen to old Steely Dan and stuff, and what Dean Parks and Larry Carlton were actually playing, a lot of times it was a Princeton or other 10-inch speaker. It records superbly, and you can. What I would tell people is you can get a Princeton with a really good 10-inch speaker, and then buy a large 2x12 for big gigs, and then you can have the little speaker in the combo, or you can have a pretty big sounding rig, because a Princeton into a large efficient 2x12 is almost as loud as a deluxe reverb, and you have so much return on your investment. I have worked on and played both the 5G9 and 5E9 Tweed Tremolux. I've got some on the channel. They're good. I prefer the 5E3 for its higher gain, and I prefer the Bassman as far as evolution. But I think the Tremolux is nice. It's a Harvard with tremolo. The Harvard is one channel with a 5E3 with a little less gain. They're really nice sounding amps, but I'm less impressed by the tremolo on those than I think the tremolo in those eras of Tweeds, kind of glitchy. Fender was still working on it. I think they didn't really get the bias trim working right until the 62 version, and the 64 and later is the best version of that tremolo, as far as not having artifacts or glitches. Now, what to me is an artifact or a glitch to someone else may be personality. So it gets subjective at some point. Let's see. Yeah, I've worked on a bunch of Bogners. I'm not a huge fan. Reinhold gives good support if you can finally get through the phone. They've had some problems with the website going away and the phone not always working, and they're having some issues, at least in the U.S. Reinhold was very helpful to me in getting customers' issues sorted out, and I wish him nothing but the best. I've not been a big fan of some of his choices in the Shiva, and I've not been a fan of like the Alchemist. But I've not tried the Ecstasy 3534, so I hope it's great. I don't have any experience with a mod for the DSL40CR master volume switch popping. I've not had that pop on the ones I've had in. But next one that comes in, I'll keep an eye out for that. It'd be pretty easy to sort that out. But I'd have to look at the schematic. Let's see. Hey, Paul Hotchkiss. I have not had a Milkman in yet. I've not had a two-rock in a long time. Two-rocks are really well built. The designs vary by the model. Some of them are really good, and some of them are good. Victoria, very good copies of what Fender did a long time ago, including some of Fender's mistakes. I think Victoria is a real, if it's possible to say this and have it not be a slam, they are the best paint by numbers artist in the world. To be fair, they've got some models which are not exact copies of old Fenders. I've not tried those, but of the old Fender clones that they make, that I've had in, they've been pretty much exact, including things that Fender got wrong, including things that Fender could not do today because of electrical safety codes that I think Victoria should pay attention to. But they're good. Milkman I've had no experience with. Hey, thank you, Jason Hobbs. Appreciate that. I already answered your question, but I do appreciate the super chat. I want everyone to know that I'm not waiting for a super chat to answer your question. I will answer them in the order that they're asked. So Jason asked a question first a while back. I answered it. He apparently was waiting for me to answer it, so he gave me a super chat. Super chats are totally optional, wholly appreciated, but not necessary. I did answer before he bribed me. So I like bribes. Bribes are good, but bribes are optional. We're coming up on the second intermission, so I was going to just do 2 hours a day, but I got permission from She Who Must Be Obeyed that we can go a third, so we're about to take a second intermission. I have heard of a Fender Bantam Goody guitars, but I've not played one. Let's see. Dead-Eye Cold Cuts, the Blues Cube and the Katana. It's an almost impossible question to answer because Roland/Boss don't release their schematics unless you're an authorized service center. And I have no interest in becoming an authorized service center for Roland and Boss because I'd also have to be taking on keyboards. And I have to, it's a very different view of the industry. I am totally capable of repairing a Blues Cube or a Katana if I had the schematic. Lacking the schematic, I've got to find a needle in a needle stack because it is just as close to saying, can you figure out how this works? And, well, yeah, it's an iPhone. I know how it works. No, inside. Well, give me a schematic and I might have a fighting chance. It's not as complicated as that, but it is very complicated. And you have, even without a schematic, I could still figure it out. But how many hours would it take me to figure out what everything's doing on those boards? Because so much of it is computer processing. So much of it is logic chips and stuff that you aren't readily apparent, or you need to have, in some cases, a flash memory to reprogram. The biggest failure that I've seen in the Katanas is you get at least failed output transistors. But the issue is it's hard to know is if the output transistor failed and that's the only thing that went wrong, or did the output transistor fail because something else went wrong, or did the output transformer fail and then take out something else? And if you don't have the schematic, you can't see what else is tied to that. You don't know which resistor. Oh, this resistor is on this other board underneath this other layer, and that needs to be changed at the same time. So when I did the video on the Katana, and I said, well, I stopped. I chose not to repair it. I gave it back to the kid after confirming that it was safe to use just for the preamp and into headphones or computer out. He can still practice with headphones. He can still record into his computer using the preamp, but the power section was dead. And I did not charge him. People are like, why didn't you just change out the, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, well, because I didn't know whether changing that power transistor would magically make it come back to life. I knew that at least needed to be changed. But if I changed that out and then it still didn't work, do I charge the kid the hour that I spent on that and the $20 for the part, even if it didn't fix his amp? Or do I say, well, now your amp's hostage to me and I got to figure this out and it's going to take 4 hours to fix, and all of a sudden you're spending $320 on an amp that costs $300. So if Boss Roland were to give me the schematic, I have a much different approach to these things, but they don't. So it's one of those. If I had some bread, I could make a sandwich if I had some meat. On that lovely thought, we're going to take another intermission, and we will be back. See you in 7 minutes. Well, let's see. I came back a little bit early. Got so many questions to get through. Pardon me. Plus, it's cold outside. Let's see. Let's see. Yeah, Muscle Shoals is good, and all the one on the Wrecking Crew is great. Good. And let's see. See a Magisterium. I say 40 minutes after you left. What do you do when you buy a bad Princeton clone amp? Bought one from Shamrock Amps. It sounds terrible. Well, I'm the wrong person to ask because I don't buy amps other people make, and I would either return it immediately or I would fix it. I'm in a unique position. I don't know what to tell you other than if you bought it from the builder, return it and get your money back. If you bought it from a dealer, see what you can do. I don't know if you bought it new or used. You know, a lot of variables I don't know here. Jen, I can't tell you. I've not used any Bogan amps. Sorry. I think someone else in the chat gave you some information on Bogan amps, but I've never had one come in. Yeah, this is such a big thing, Chapit. Good point Chapit raised. As soon as you leave creative mode and you're in analyzing mode, it's hard. It's why you can be the world's best musician. You probably shouldn't produce yourself because you lose objectivity. The engineer's job is a different mindset than the musician's job, which is a different mindset than the producer's job. Generally, some guys pull it off, but it's rare, and a lot of times that's when they're still capable of doing stuff, but their quality is not great because no one's telling them no anymore. But in this case, if you're analyzing, you're watching yourself, you're observing. Observing is not the same thing as doing. It's like, you ever play a video, the example most people can relate to of our generations, you're playing a video game, and all of a sudden you realize, hey, you're doing really well. Wow, I'm really doing well. That's when you die. When you weren't thinking about your score or how close to your objective you were just doing the thing. You were just doing. You're in entirely different mindset than when you're observing yourself doing it. So as soon as you have a technical issue, as soon as you're like, hey, is the reverb up too much? Hey, is this the right speaker? Hey, should I be on a different pickup? You're not being creative at that point, and all of a sudden things can fall apart, and you can have a bad gig, or you think you suck. Even if the audience doesn't know, you know because you're not in the right headspace anymore. Hey, Joe Meyer, he's got a Music Man 65 head. The bright switches do nothing. Is this a tech delete, or is it something broken? Probably something's broken. Music Men that I've had in, Music Mans, those bright switches were very, very effective. But those switches wear out. They're mechanical, and they're from the 70s. So you're probably two switchcraft switches away from, or possibly the capacitors associated with them, away from something working. It could just be a bad solder joint, or someone could have disconnected them. Without knowing more about your amp, I can't tell you. But usually those bright switches are very apparent. Hey, Jorge, I appreciate that. Yeah, I always remove the master volume bright cap on a Silverface Fender. I don't snip it. I just desolder one end of it. I'll physically leave it in the amp, connected at one end, but not at the other end. If I think it's going to vibrate, I'll put a little electrical tape around it or something. But if someone in the future wants to have the authentic, painfully thin sound of a old 78 twin with a master 3, they can do that. But if you actually want it to sound good, disconnect one end of that cap. And thank you very much for the super chat. I don't think I've ever seen an amp using 12x7s for push-pull, but I have seen some using them single-ended like you described there. I don't personally see the need for 1 or 2 watt amps. I think 12, 15 is as low as I'd be interested in myself, because then you could gig with it, but with a master volume you can still play as quietly as the lower wattage ones. Maybe I'm just an old man who likes things to get loud. I like the sound of things at least at 85 dB. Thank you, Jason. Your kindness is noted. You are in the YouTube minority, but I do wish that I was a better player. But I wish I didn't have nerve damage. So I wish I didn't have onset of arthritis. I wish cotton was a monkey. I wish I had a watermelon. I wish it was a little bit taller. I wish it was a baller. I wish I had a girl with a phone. I would call her. Anyway, what was I saying? Yeah, we can wish for a lot of things, but it doesn't mean that I don't know how amps work. Just because I have hand injuries over the years, it's not like everything I learned in the past 50 years has disappeared just because I can't play Eruption anymore. And if I could play Eruption anymore, odds are I'd be one of those people who plays Eruption. And haven't we all had enough people playing Eruption? Hey, Tony Lenardi, thank you very much. Appreciate that. What I've advised as a replacement that doesn't sound boxy, but very similar in general. Deluxe Reverb. Deluxe Reverb is what a Blues Junior wants to be when it grows up. Absolutely. And the Deluxe Reverb is one of the world's most perfect amps. I also love, and for less money, you can get the Vox AC15 Custom 1. This AC15C1 is also one of the world's greatest amps. It's not actually, because the output tubes, you might like that just as much as you like your Blues Junior. I'd say if you play a Deluxe Reverb, play a AC15C1, and you won't miss a Blues Junior at that point. Those are two all-time desert island amps. And the Vox is much more affordable for most players, but the Deluxe Reverb reissue, especially if you buy one used, is not terribly expensive, and doesn't and new is like $200 more than the Blues Junior new. So I don't know how the Blues Junior justifies its existence. What is the advantage of a Blues Junior over a Deluxe Reverb? It's about the same volume. It's about the same feature set. It's got a push. You got a foot switch that gives you fat, which is just connecting a cathode bypass cap, so you have two preset volume levels. You don't have it with the Deluxe Reverb, but for the Deluxe Reverb, you got a second channel, and you have vibrato. Other than that, it's a 15 to 20 watt amp with a single 12-inch speaker and reverb, and the reverb sounds better on the Deluxe Reverb. The Deluxe Reverb is a better amp in every way. It's physically a little bit larger, a little bit heavier, but not much. Thank you, Chapad. I appreciate that, and I really do appreciate your comment about once something goes wrong, people can't be creative, because that's one of the biggest things I try to give players when they bring me an amp, is that when I send the amp home with them, they don't have to worry about what the knob positions are. You pretty much just turn it on and set everything to noon, and whoa, there's the sound I've wanted. I don't have to think about the box behind me anymore. I can just play. Hey, Jose, I have not seen the newest cathode-biased Blues Junior, but the first 4 had the same problems. I would not be surprised if the newest version has the same problems, because they don't care about fixing it. From what I have seen of the cathode bias version, is that they used to run on the fixed bias. They would run the bias at 120%, which would be borderline fine for cathode bias, but it was insane for a fixed bias. So on the new cathode bias, they've got it biased at like 60%, which is good for fixed bias, but insanely cold for cathode. So I don't know what the deal with Fender's thinking is, other than people keep buying them no matter what mistakes that they put out on the market. So, what amp in the $1,500 to $2,000 range would I recommend? It depends on what kind of music you're playing and how loud you need it to be. I mean, because I could say, well, all you need is a 1972 Princeton Reverb, or all you need is a Marshall JCM 900 100-watt reissue, because you could get each of those for the same price. Very different amps. So tell me more what you're looking for, and I can help you more. And I don't mean that to be flippant, but it's like, what car should I get for $60,000? Well, for me, I get 2 cars for $60,000. Other people, they'd be like, well, that gets me the base model of what I need, and actually, I can almost get 3 in my car for $60,000. For those wondering, I've got a 2016 Volkswagen Golf, which I love. It's the turbo non-diesel, so it's a good car. Let's see. Let's see. Get into the next questions. I think I'm during one of my intermissions, people just talking to each other, and that's great. I love that people here talk to each other. Larry Amps guy is not a nut. Now, Larry is a bit of a character, but he knows his tech. The ground scheme for Marshalls that I have promoted on my videos is often called the Larry ground scheme. I honestly came up with it independently of that, but then I found it, and his is slightly different from mine in terms of where he likes to connect the heater center tap or heater reference than I do. But it's the same concept. So he agrees with me, even though his name is the one associated with it. So if he agrees with me, I think he's great. That's how the world works, right? Right? Hey, Jason Hobbs, what are the signs that the screen resistor and grid stoppers are bad other than measuring? Well, first of all, measure. Measuring reveals a lot. Second of all, literally scratch and sniff. A lot of times on old Fender, the screen grid resistors get dark and can burn. You can kind of see that they're toasty. A lot of times they will still be working, but if you touch them with a chopstick, you'll notice that there's a split in them, and as soon as you move it, they stop working. But they've been held in place so long that they're still kind of functioning. In general, I've never had a screen grid resistor that measured good but was bad. Usually, you'll know either it's open or it's way high. Often will be have a coloration to it. Grid stopper measurement tells an awful lot. Beyond that, whenever I get an old amp in, the first thing I'll do is once I verify that it's safe to power on, I'll power it on without the output tubes and take a measurement of the grids. And if the grids are wildly different from each other, then all of a sudden I know that, hey, on the other side of the grid stopper, it's negative 42 volts, but here at this side of the grid stopper, this one's still negative 42, but these are all negative 42, but this one's nothing, or negative 10, or negative 50. It depends on how it's working. It's not going to go hotter, but but measuring usually reveals all you need to know on those. And all the grid stoppers in a Fender don't need to be precisely 1.5K, but they don't need to be precise to each other. One can be 1.6, one can be 1.8. That doesn't really matter. But if they're over 30% out of tolerance, that's a big warning sign. Thank you, Bill Lavonda. Appreciate that. Six-string codger asks, thoughts on the Bassbreaker 30R. I don't know if I have, if that's the model in question, but all the Bassbreakers which have the automatic bias board, avoid them because those things die. Overly complicated systems which are not reliable should not be rewarded. And so the fix is to take that out and put in a standard bias circuit. And a standard bias circuit might have 7 components, and all the components are reliable and inexpensive. It's just no need to have this fancy auto bias circuit, especially when they continuously fail. So the Bassbreaker is not very well built in general, and those Bassbreakers with the auto bias circuit specifically should be avoided. Let's see. Yeah, Bill Frisell is just fantastic, isn't he, Jason? I really love his playing. I think I first discovered him. I knew of him from like Marshall endorsement ads, which was a strange combination in the '90s. I think of Bill Frisell with Marshalls. I don't even remember what Marshall he was endorsing. I think it was one of the little solid state things or little 12-watt things. But there's a picture of him playing in some cafe in New York, and he had an SG Junior. I'm like, that's a cool guy. But then I discovered him. I think he was playing Shenandoah in an early YouTube video. And it was a live looper kind of thing. And just amazing, amazing touch, amazing musicality. I do have experience with seritone amplifiers, Bill Vonda. Overall, they're pretty good. I have long-term concerns about their transformers. I've had anecdotal evidence from other techs that they've had problems with those transformers failing. I have not encountered a failed transformer. I've encountered brand new seritones with broken IEC connectors and fuse holders because the plastic used on those fuse holders and those IEC connectors were such poor quality. Other stuff in the amp was really high quality. That stuff would be bad. And then like lots of mystery caps under orange plastic that says seritone. I don't know what caps are underneath that orange plastic. So there's some stuff that make me go, The wiring has been really good. I had a JCM 800 style come in the bus bar, they had a big bus bar used for the grounding, and I had to go in there and redo all that because they had never removed enough of the oxidization from the bus bar when they first did the grounds, and so it had a whole bunch of bad grounds in it. So I have a mixed experience with seritone. Basically, if I were to tell a client, get a seritone and have it shipped, bring it right to me, and then I'll do some stuff, and then you'll have a good amp. A couple weeks later, that's a very different thing than, hey, you just go buy one and go try to use it, because I don't trust them to be ready for prime time as they come, not all models at least. And I had one of their Dumble clones. It was a big red thing, and it had the Dumbulator built in beneath it. That was a really good sounding amp after I was done with it, but I had to make a lot of changes to it that I would not need to with other things. Like, Victor Beebs here. Hey, Victor, aloha. He's been playing this fairly new Germino amp. And, when a Germino comes in, half the time, if the customer doesn't like the Germino, it's customer education time, because Germinos are almost always flawless. And I've never been able to say that about any seritone I've worked on or even played. It's not just, because if I work on it, obviously most amps that come here have an issue. But I've played brand new seritone builds and like, ooh, did no one hear that? So, but I'm so finicky. Hey, Natas. His AC30C2 tremolo turns on after he takes the amp off standby. I have to turn trim on and off on foot switch. I'm glad you like the Ruby tank. The Ruby tubes are not... Ruby is just they don't make tubes. They just stick their name on tubes. I would not buy a tube labeled Ruby unless it was the only tube that was available to me. They're not a manufacturer; they're a reseller. But I'm going to check what's up with your AC32 tremolo though. That's weird. Just 1 second. I'm gonna. Oh, I can't right now because I've got all my Vox schematics in my Google Drive. I have the Google thing turned off right now because it makes the stream sound weird. I'll look for that. The AC30C2 uses a little surface mount circuit for the foot switching stuff. I've not really looked into it because I never had any problems with it before. And it may be that there's a logic thing there with a voltage or a flip-flop circuit. I haven't looked into the foot switching circuit on the C2. That's odd. I'll try to figure that out for you. But yeah, Ruby makes good tanks. They're the same tanks I think the MOD sells. They're just branded Ruby. I think it's the same thing for the tanks labeled TAD. But Ruby is not a manufacturer. And Jorge's got a good question. Thank you, Jorge. Thumping, not ticking, of tremolo heard on the normal channel of a Silverface twin when tremolo is on. Solutions. Well, hopefully you're still here, Jorge, and you can reply because I can see in one window what's current versus your question, which was asked a while back ago. Is this with the volume off on, or only when the volume is up of the normal channel? Because if you're hearing it, you're plugged in the normal channel, but you're still hearing it with the volume of the normal channel off, then there's a problem. The output is just being mixed in from the output of the tremolo circuit. But if you only hear the thumping when you are playing the normal channel, as in you have to have the normal channel volume up to hear it, then it's a very different set of problems. So if you can type whether it happens only when with the volume. All right, so with the volume off. All right, so that's not going to be affecting the normal channel. That's just going to be blended in. At the end of, you have the normal channels chain and you've got the vibrato channel chain, and then they mix together at the input to the phase inverter through two 20K mixed resistors. So it doesn't matter what's happening on the normal channel chain if you have thumping on the reverb channel change. So probably, yeah, what Forgotten Gear Restoration says here, what Frank says, I would first start by, if you feel safe doing this, because you have to do this with a live amp, get a wooden chopstick or a plastic chopstick or other utensil that's non-conductive and move the wires around V5. A lot of the times, the V5 wire, the wires going to V5, especially on V5A, are very close to the wires running to V4B. And V4B is the last audio stage of your reverb channel, your vibrato channel. And so the pulsing in the wires going to V5, which are for the tremolo, can just jump over into the audio wires on V4. And so by moving the wires physically inside the chassis away from each other, you can often get that thumping to go away. But it has to be done when the amp is powered on and you can hear things. And so there's live voltage. You can hurt yourself if you're not very careful. But I have shown myself doing this in other videos. I don't have one off the top of my head where I can say, hey, it's definitely this video to check out. But it's just a matter of if two wires are running really close to each other, you can have sound from one wire jump over to the other one. But if you just move them a little bit, the sound decreases. Move them a bit more, the sound goes away. As you double the different, if I move it like 1/8 of an inch and then move it another 1/8 of an inch, I'm not making the sound half as loud as it was at 1/8 of an inch. It's like 10 times quieter. So the farther away, the drop off in cross pollination, let's call it that, becomes extreme. So just moving something 1/4 of an inch can have huge payoffs. So that's the thing to do. It'll take you like 20 minutes. Be very, very careful. Don't put your fingers inside the chassis. Don't touch anything that you don't know what it is, make sure that whatever tool you're using is wood or plastic or something else which is non-conductive so you can't electrocute yourself, and just gently but firmly move the wires away from each other between V4 and V5. And if you don't know what I mean, V4 is valve 4, V5 is valve 5. So looking at your Fender from the rear, from the right to left is V1, 2, 3, and then the reverb transformer, then 4, 5, 6, and then it goes to the power tubes. So looking at it from the rear, the reverb transformer, the one to the left of the reverb transformer is V4, the one to the left of that is V5. And those are the ones that you need to move the wires with. Rarely V5 will interfere with V6, which is the phase inverter, but I think it's much more likely that it's V4. Let us know how you do. It doesn't take long, and as long as you know what you're doing in terms of, all right, I'm not going to put my fingers in here, I'm not going to touch anything, I'm just going to move everything with this chopstick, you can't hurt it. Unless you had a bad solder joint, in which case you'll find you had a bad solder joint. Let's see. Hello to everyone. Yeah, I've tried the GA10 SC64. It's a good sounding speaker. I think it's a bit... it's kind of depending on what your flavor is. I find it a bit of a mid-range prominent speaker, and the Princeton already has a lot of mids, and the cabinet of Princeton can be very mid-rangey. Some people are going to love it. Some people are going to find it not the right choice for them. That's the nice thing about this is that there's so many different flavors of ice cream, and you can try a speaker, and it's like, hey, okay, let's try this mocha. Okay, that's better than the rum raisin, but it's not as good as the French vanilla or whatever. It's all subjective. As long as the speaker has the right impedance and is rated for at least the amount of wattage that the amp puts out, you're fine. You won't hurt anything. There's the objective, what is safe. And then there's the subjective, what do I like? And you may like a speaker that no one else likes. And you may hate the speaker that everyone else loves. And while that makes you weird, it doesn't make you wrong. What's my opinion on lazy J20 amps? They're utter shit. I don't have one on the YouTube channel, but I did a series that you can still find on the Facebook version. I still have my Facebook business page up, and my God, the damn thing was just so poorly built and designed, and it was just an utter nonsense. It's like someone's first kit built that was being sold for a large amount of money and then promoted it on all these YouTube channels, and people have T-shirts with it, and it's like a bizarre cult where the worst possible product becomes really popular. It'd be like if there was no more fried chicken in the world because everyone wanted chicken nuggets. Only the chicken nuggets exploded. So, no thank you. Oh, and the exploding chicken nuggets cost $1,700 for a box of 5. I think as far as integrity goes, the chicken nugget has more integrity than a Lazy J. And yes, I mean the McDonald's stuff made by making chicken into like putty and squeezed through a tube. Hey, Navid City. AC15's H amps have a built-in power soak. The CH, yeah, the AC15CH, the new custom series built-in power soak, which makes them quite interesting for home practicing. Have I ever seen one? Are they any good? I have not only seen one, I have used them. They do work fine. They are pretty good power attenuators. They are using resistors. They are not a reactive load in the full sense, but they are a good load. I'm not sure that they're all that great an option for a buyer as far as that feature goes, because for like $250 you can buy the fractal reactive load now, and the non-IR SIR is like $300. So I think it makes sense to offer a built-in attenuator for a head because it's something you can just keep right over there and on your desk, and you use it with all your digital stuff, and it makes sense. but I don't think the load in it is as musical or as useful as a standalone external third-party load is or can be. But it is not bad. It's not unsafe. You are limited to only using the 16 ohm tap, which is not really a problem for most people. I thought it was nice. It's no downside to it other than that it's not quite as good as what you can get these days from external stuff. If this thing had come out 10 years ago, it would have been transformative. And you still see that on cars. Car amps use little speaker coils as reactive loads. And I have some concerns about them as far as heat goes, but I've not seen them fail, so my concerns are purely theoretical at this point. I'm sorry, I'm just kind of freestyling again. Let's see. Yeah, I have Michael Davis. I have no problem with Victoria amps. I just wish they would stop putting the freaking fuse on the neutral, and I wish they would sort out their safety grounds a little bit better, and stop putting death caps in amps. They don't need death caps, and I also think that as far as the Fender clones go, they have got way too much low end, much like the originals that they're copying. And I don't mean like, hey, it's too much low end because I like it to be thin, but we don't really need to have much 2 hertz being amplified in a guitar amp. You know, I shelve everything below 30 because everything below 30 hertz is not going to come through the speaker. It's just going to waste power. But every time your skin rubs on the string, you're making all those subfrequencies that the amplifier cannot push out through the power transformer, but the amplifier tries, and so it's wasted power, and it kind of makes everything sludgy. It's like, okay, it sounds good compared to what? So you get an amp with all that stuff, including everything flat down to 7 hertz, whatever, and you think it's great. Then you hear an amp which has been optimized for guitar, and you're like, oh, yeah, okay, yeah, that does make a difference. I can talk about it all day, but until you play an amp that is trying to reproduce stuff you can never hear versus an amp where everything is kind of reserved for what you can actually hear, it makes a big difference, but talking about it won't convince anyone. Let's see. When you wish you had some meat, a wish sandwich. Hey, that's right, Lou. Bow, 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 bow. What do you want for nothing? Rubber biscuit? That was a terrible trill. Sorry. Used to be better at that back in high school when that album came out. Hey, Nick Sarah. How many passes of trying to clear DC from eyelet board would I say is normal for me? When's the point when I might just get a new eyelet board? Thanks. I spent about 3 or 4 hours getting the DC out of that 64 Deluxe Reverb that just went home. But it's not like I'm spending 4 hours constantly working on it. You know, I would soak the entire board in DC and wipe up all the excess on top and get a lot of the dirt out on top. And I'd already moved the bottom board, and then I'd prop the board up off the chassis and hit the whole thing with a heat gun, and then I'd let it sit for an hour, and then I'd do the whole thing again. So I already gotten off the dirt and old flux and stuff, and I had soaked the board and forced most of the heat out of it, and then let it air dry, and then do it again. I mean, how many trying to get? I'm not sure we mean getting IPA out. Isopropyl leaves by itself. If just give it patience. But anyway, I'll usually I'll give it like 4 hours worth of soaking, and repeats, because I do it and then I put it to the side, do something else. And it's worthwhile because it really rejuvenates things. In all my years of doing this, I've only replaced a Fender board twice. Did I say soak it in DC? Okay. All right. Sorry. Tired. Isopropyl alcohol. Just 91% from Walgreens, not the fancy stuff for this. I'm not trying to make a mirror polish on a on a PC board. Just replace all the water in the board with alcohol, and I don't mind doing it several times. Anyway, twice I've replaced the board in a Fender. Once was a 65 Deluxe Reverb that had been in a house fire. That was necessary. And once was one that had charred because it had never been cleaned and no one had ever recapped it because Mojo, and it charred itself. That one I tried everything. I even tried brake cleaning solution, and I just had to replace the board. But I don't like replacing boards in old Fenders because they're not set up for it. If you change to a modern form of board, you want to use standoffs, and then how do you do the standoffs without interfering with the transformers or the stuff in the doghouse? It's doable, but it's difficult. So it's usually easier and faster just to clean the old fiberboard and buy another 10 to 20 years out of it, or longer if the owner takes care of it. If the owner plays the amp all the time, it's not going to recur very often. If the owner lets it sit for 6 months in a humid room, we're going to have it's going to come back eventually. It's what temperature is it today? It was cold earlier. It's been colder the past couple days than it is now. I know that. Let's see. Right now it's 54, but last night it was 27. It's going to be much warmer the rest of the week, so that's good. Oh, we're going to get back up in the 60s. Nice. So, yeah, all right. But last night it was 27, and this morning when I started the stream and I said it was cold, it was not 54 yet. And it's a very humid temperature, so very cold, 40s. Can I tell you maximum plate voltage on the L84s? I think the data sheet says like 350, and I want to see 320 to 340 typically tops, but a lot of people run 400 plus. 420 is not uncommon, sadly. I want everyone to read what Brad said here because I agree with it entirely. Entirely. It's so frustrating. You get an amp that's built like shit, and you make it sound great. And you know what's going to happen is that someone's going to hear that amp, think that sounds great, and they're going to go buy the person who made the shitty thing to begin with. It's just, I'll do anything in the world to make the 65 Princeton sound good again because I didn't have to do that much. I have to be methodical about it, I have to be careful about it, but I'm just restoring it to how it was built. It was built right the first time. I will take great care with I've got an old Vox in the other room. I've got some old Marshalls. They were good amps to begin with. All I got to do is bring them back to where they were. And they can take all the credit at that point because they were good to begin with. But when I get an amp in that was a piece of shit and then I turn it into something great, I don't get the credit because it still says piece of shit on the logo. And people buy the piece of shit, and they buy the piece of shit T-shirts, and they tell all their friends to buy the piece of shits. And then that pedal show plays the piece of shit, and they have the owner of the piece of shit on there, And so the piece of shit gets famous. Anyway, it's a bad feeling. Let's see. Sorry, Brad's thinking about box. I'm assuming that's an Australian thing. Let's see. I must be next intermission that I've finally caught up to. Yeah, Victor. Good compared to what? Yeah, people think Pro Juniors sound good until they play it next to Princeton. The Germino's a really unfair comparison, but the Pro Junior just isn't very good. I'd rather if every Pro Junior were to magically transform into a Katana 50 overnight, everyone would have we have a much better sounding world. And it's not like the Katana 50 is amazing. It's pretty good for a very low price. But the Pro Junior is not even pretty good, and it's not a low price. It's we're back to the chicken nuggets thing. I'll just stop there. But I'm really glad you got your Germino and you're happy with it because Greg makes great amps. What's my top 5 favorite guitar players and singers? Well, let's do singers first because that's much easier. Ella Fitzgerald, probably the best non-classical singer we've ever had, and I don't like classical opera, so yeah. Man, Ella Fitzgerald is just the shit. George Michael was really phenomenal and easy to overlook, but he really was an amazing singer. I love Freddie Mercury, and Freddie Mercury is great, but Freddie Mercury has been overblown to an extent, and George Michael technically had a greater range and the same amount of power, but Freddie Mercury deserves to make the list. I'll give Lennon and McCartney equal places, and pre-1970 Elvis, Aretha Franklin. I'm past 5 now, and I can't. Otis Redding, my God, oh my God, Otis Redding. I can't do a top 5, but top 1 is always going to be Ella Fitzgerald. Her pitch, her phrasing, her timing, her she could just do everything amazingly. And Karen Carpenter, the girls from ABBA were fantastic. I saw an ABBA thing a couple of weeks back. It was a live concert, and people today couldn't do that show. Bands today, well, there are players who can, but there are so few singers out there who could do that show live, and they did it live, and they had crude monitors. The Karen Carpenters and the Beatles and the Abbas of the world are all in the past now. If someone could go out there and just nail it on a purely professional level, with barely able to hear themselves on stage and still be perfectly in pitch. It used to be when people were professional musicians, they were musicians who were professional about it. And now we've got a lot of auto-tune happening. I listen to the Spotify top 10 about once a month just to make myself not be entirely divorced from current reality. And current reality sounds so bad. Top 5 guitar players. There's no such thing as top 5, but I can say 5 of my favorites. I always, this is not in any sequence, and maybe there's no rhyme or reason to it. Ella Fitzgerald, sorry. Peter Buck, Andy Summers, George Harrison. God, there's so many. Stevie Ray, and let's just end it with Alex Lifeson, and there's so many more. All of them are fantastic. And if you notice that list, Lifeson's, I guess, the most technically capable of those, and maybe Peter Buck's the least, or George Harrison was the least, but it doesn't matter because they wrote those parts, and the world was full of 80 shredders who could play anything in the world, but couldn't write their way out of a paper bag. So Yeah, Sam and Dave is awesome. I bet they were difficult people in real life, but they were very, very good at doing that thing. Fantastic performers. Anyway, back to amps. John Rayham's got a 74 Vibrolux. There's distortion on the output at low volumes. Amp puts out loud if you turn it up. Scoop the signals, clean up to the inputs of the grid, 6L6s. Sounds like you've got a bad 6L6. Probably 166. Oh, you swapped the 6L6s too. Well, something's wrong because you're describing an amp that's only in push mode or only in pull mode. You could have a problem with negative feedback. Disconnect the negative feedback circuit and see if the problem goes away, in which case you might have a faulty ground on the output jack. You could have negative feedback component has failed. You could just have too much negative feedback. Say if your 820 ohm or 100 ohm rather actually measures like 10. Ted, I'm not saying Freddie Mercury was overrated and therefore is not great. I'm thinking that currently Freddie Mercury is given an exalted ranking that he certainly never got at the time he was alive. I think Freddie Mercury is fantastic, but I think right now he's discussed in crazy terms, and he had limitations. That's why he wasn't the only singer in the band. I think he had great personality, though. And I love Freddie Mercury. I think he would agree with what I'm saying. Sorry, but back to John Rayham. You've definitely got a problem in the output. Worst comes to worst, you got an bad output transformer. But it's really tricky to diagnose beyond that from here. Make sure that first of all, disconnect the negative feedback. Make sure it's not that. I keep spare output transformers around, and I know enough that I know that I can use this one with this amp, even if it's not the correct one for that model as a test. So worst comes to worst, get it any 6L6 safe, any output transformer that's rated for 6L6s, and try it in there and see what you get. It could be, you got 74, and you've tried different speakers, and you've tried different speaker cables. Sounds like your troubleshooting's been good, but yeah, go. Sorry, I'm trying to read like 8 things at once. Definitely try a different output transformer if screen grids and grid stoppers aren't it, because the voltages would tell you that. So it's fun, unless you've had like 5 bad output tubes in a row, which I've had almost that many in a row once or twice. Always fun when that happens. I have not had any revs in yet. I hope to get one in at some point. I've seen some pictures, but I have not had one in real life. All right, let's see if I'll make sure I haven't missed any super chats. It's about time to wrap this up. We're getting close. Yeah, I've been living in the bathroom lately. It's not, of course, it's not been a bathroom. Yeah, it will be at some point. Lennon was a great singer when he wasn't on heroin, and then the 70s did him a number on him, but he was getting it back. But when he had self-confidence, he was just an amazing singer. Dylan was never a great singer. Dylan was a great performer, though. And I love all kinds of Dylan voices. Even Nashville Skyline and John Wesley Harding's voice, but I do prefer him before the motorcycle accident. But Lennon, when he was in his confident mode, he was as good as Elvis. He was just amazing, and then he for all the things that happened later in his life, he seemed to have had a big loss of confidence, and been interesting to see who he could have turned into if he hadn't been killed. He was only 40. I mean, he stopped being a Beatle at 30, took 10 years off, was getting back into it and gone. And he was such a young man. And at the time, he seemed old to me. I was 9 when he died, 9, almost 10. But yeah, he was just a kid. So strange to think about. Yeah, I saw the Dylan Chalamet ad the other day, and no, thank you. Looked very, very wrong from my perspective. And how many times do we need? How many films about that period of Bob Dylan do we need? There's already a film about that period. It's the one that Pennebaker shot. They made a film. And Dylan already gave us everything he wanted to give us in that time. I think it's much more revealing than people being inspired by that or trying to make money off that. Anyway, that time has passed, and now our time has passed, and it is time for me to go fire up the Sawzall and all that fun stuff and get started putting in new headers so I can put in the new joists and all that fun stuff. And there'll be a video on that soon, and a video on this details of the 65 Princeton and its 69 sibling. And life will get back to normal soon. Next weekend, we're going to be visiting her family for their family Christmas, and then I'll be back in town for the holidays. So I'm not sure when Christmas falls, when our next live stream will be, but we will be back together when we are back together. And I'm so glad we had this time together. I'm going to go find my mom.